Hi, I'm Chris McCoy, and welcome to Memphis Flyer Podcast. Every week, we jump on here to tell you what's going on in the city, what we're covering in the paper. And this week, I am flanked by guests. I'm usually on this side. Now I'm in the middle because they wanted to flank me, I think. We're here with Rebecca Cadenhead from MLK 50 and Joann Selvidge, filmmaker and raconteur. And we are talking about juvenile justice today. Because that's our cover story, which Rebecca, we partner with MLK 50 sometimes. And you wrote the story originally for MLK 50, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And but let's start with Joann, because we talked about this beforehand, and we want to do a timeline for you on juvenile justice. So Joann, you directed a film, and my wife edited the film, Laura Jean, called Juvenile 5 Stories. How did that project get started?
Well, it got started a long time ago, actually. Here we are in 2025. The film itself came out in 2023. Mm-hmm. But the roots of the film actually go all the way back to 2007. Mm-hmm. So back in 2007, Sarah Fleming and I, Sarah's my co-director, then we've worked on all of these films that are at the intersection of criminal justice and mental health. And to kind of go back even further and answer the question of why am I this white woman making films about criminal justice, it really goes back to when I was 17. I was institutionalized. I had a manic psychotic break at school, and being a white girl at a private school, they didn't have school resource officers to arrest me because I was acting erratic and disrupting everything. So I was committed to a mental health hospital instead. And I had grown up with family members who experienced mental illness. I have a first cousin who has been incarcerated due to untreated mental illness and substance use disorder. And so I was always aware of that intersection of mental health and criminal justice. And I grew up in the 80s, right? So Reagan shut down all of these public mental health facilities in the 80s. And most of those people who were dealing with serious mental illnesses began living on the streets, and then were funneled into the criminal justice system, which was on its rise, right? Starting in the 70s, you had the criminal justice system started to become kind of the answer to all of our societal troubles and challenges, right? And so when you get to here in Memphis in 2009, the Department of Justice had sued our juvenile court for basically lack of due process, treating children and families in an unconstitutional manner. And Sarah and I had been working with the public defender. At the time, the public defender, this was way back, this was a long time ago, but they had set up a jail diversion program for people with serious mental illnesses. And so we had made a number of kind of short films around this. And then in 2012, when Shelby County government entered into an MOU with the Department of Justice to say, okay, yeah, you know what, you're right. Our juvenile court system is really messed up, and we actually need your help to get us back on track. And in 2012, Stephen Bush was a public defender, and he kind of came to us, and we had these conversations around what would it be like to make a film about juvenile justice, about the youth justice system. And because previously we'd been looking at the criminal legal system and what it looks like for adults. It's a totally different story when you look at what it looks like for young people who are in the system. And so I was finishing up a film. So around 2015, Sarah Fleming and I did a series of short films with a mom, with some young people who were in, and at the time it was called Incarcerated Youth Speaking Out for Change. And with public defenders to kind of get a handle on what was actually happening and what changes were happening. And so we actually started working on Juvenile 5 Stories, the feature film that's going to be playing this weekend, around 2016, 2017, 2018. But if you think about that time frame, in the juvenile system, since the mid-90s, at the height of the super predator era, things had been MacArthur Foundation had done a lot of work around JDAI, which is trying to get these youth justice programs to shrink, right? And so that had been happening over this whole time period, from the early 2000s into 2016. In 2017, the first time Trump was elected, Jeff Sessions came in as the Department of Justice head, and he said, you know what, all these guidelines around shrinking youth justice systems, we're gonna just slash those. And so it was a really interesting time to be working on the film 2018, 2019, where all of these states had finally raised the age up to 18. That had been a huge campaign to shift the age of responsibility for minors all the way up to 18, so they weren't automatically adjudicated as adults. And then the pandemic hit. And my co-director and I had small kids, and so we had to kind of like regroup. And so eventually we were able to work with your wife, Laura Jean Hawking.
Who was the editor,
along with Princess Harrison, who's a fabulous editor and who's based in New York, and to craft a film that we knew that was going to be something that people could use and see as a way to kind of emotionally connect with the stories of young people. So the 5 young people in the film were from all over the country, and so you see the way juvenile systems work in different parts of the country, but you also see all of these young people were incarcerated when they were teenagers, and now they're, in the film, they're 18 to 23 years old, and they're out and they're back in their communities, and they're trying to kind of make sense of what happened to them and trying to kind of do what they can to change the way these systems work so that they're not so harmful. So I'll kind of that's my spiel.
That's the spiel. And the people in the film, just like now, well, originally they were incarcerated for simple assault was one of them. There was what's the one woman that really didn't do anything, right? She was just a foster kid. Yeah,
Charmaine Holly, who was actually a co-writer on the film with us. Actually, literally was texting with her this morning because she has become the most amazing, just advocate and speaker around these issues. But yeah, I mean, the young girls who's actually there, it's the population of young girls who are in the system is increasing. And most of the times it's because they've been victimized or they've been harmed in some way or because the state can't figure out what to do with them. Like Charmaine, Charmaine was DC. She said it was always because of the Department of Children and Family Services that she actually that was the reason that she was ending up in jail. It wasn't because she did something wrong. It was because they didn't have a placement for her, so they just put her into the system because that was like food and housing and programming.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and then two of the young men in the film were actually, as youth, they were charged as adults. So it's a story about what happens to you, what happens to young people who've been traumatized, and how the systems are failing to support them. And instead trying to saying, well, I'm just going to throw up our hands and we're just going to push them off over into this other system. Then instead of giving them care, punishes them.
Yeah. So, and the film is screening this weekend, Saturday night.
Yes.
Where are we screening? It's
at Bridges. It's in partnership with the Youth Justice Action Council and MLK 50. And and I'm super excited. Rebecca's here because this is really a great opportunity to be able to showcase the film and showcase the young leaders who are part of the Youth Justice Action Council. And Rebecca gets to moderate that conversation after the film.
Yeah.
So Bridges, 6:00 doors open, 6:30 the film happens, and then at 7:30 Rebecca and the two young leaders will be speaking.
Yes, because it's a 60-minute film.
That's right. 57 minutes.
57 minutes. Because when we were doing the edit, my wife was like, Laura was like, this is really heavy. We need to just like 2 hours is too much.
Oh yeah, never do something that long. That's ridiculous.
But so Rebecca, like I said, has our cover this week and with an MLK 50 story, and I feel like you pick up the narrative kind of where they left off.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Yeah, basically. I mean, a lot of the broader context was left out of the story for space reasons, but I really appreciate Joann bringing up the bigger picture because the story that I'm telling really is within this context. So for some background, the story that I wrote is about basically the illegal use of solitary confinement inside Shelby County's Juvenile Detention Center. And that was quite surprising to me to find was going on because in the 2010s, honestly, the entire country, but particularly the state of Tennessee, made a lot of strides towards reforming the juvenile justice system. And those reforms statewide included making the use of solitary confinement for juveniles basically illegal. And in Shelby County, because the Department of Justice was monitoring the juvenile justice system here from 2012 through 2018, Shelby County in particular made a lot of efforts to eliminate the use of solitary confinement before it actually became illegal on the state level. So you'll find old reports about the Juvenile Detention Center here that basically praise it as like being a national leader in the elimination of solitary confinement. But when I started looking into what was happening at the Juvenile Detention Center currently about a year ago, I really started to hear over and over again from formerly incarcerated youth, from parents, from defense attorneys, from others, that solitary confinement was being used quite extensively within the center. And what I ended up finding is that the center has 2 solitary confinement units where youth who are basically deemed troublemakers are taken. And when they are put into these units, they are kept there for weeks or months at a time. And they basically are let out of their cells for 1 hour every 1 to 3 days. And when they're in these cells, they have essentially nothing to entertain themselves. They can't go to school. Obviously, they can't go outside. They have nothing to read. They have no games to play. And, you know, I don't think I have to say it in my own words. There are a lot of other organizations and a lot of research that would basically say that these kind of conditions are torture. So yeah, that's basically what my story is about.
So what reasons do they give for putting these kids in solitary?
Well, to be clear, the sheriff was operating the center during the time of my reporting. Currently, it's being operated by the Division of Corrections. The sheriff denies ever using solitary confinement inside the center. So they wouldn't give an explanation because they said that it wasn't existing. However, they did acknowledge that these units existed. They just said that they weren't solitary confinement units. They said that they were behavior units. And they said that they put children in there because they were essentially a threat to the general population of the center, the staff of the center, teachers, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so how long did you work on this story? A year?
Yeah, I worked on it for a year.
Wow. That's great that MLK 50 will let you like go.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm super
like
grateful to my editors for letting me work on this for that long. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're very happy to have it in the paper this week, as always, as our cover story. And so, have you seen Juvenile? Have you seen the movie yet?
I have watched part of it, actually. I'm going to finish watching it before we have our discussion.
See, I put you on the spot. I'm sorry. That was not cool of me. That was not cool of me. But I think it's really interesting that it's like it's very 2 halves of a story. You know, like because you like leave off in the midst of like reform and in the mid 2020s or so. And now you are talking about the backsliding.
Yeah,
again.
yeah. And that is something that you kind of see across the country, to be honest. It really seems to be COVID related. I mean, like I'm telling the story about the illegal use of solitary confinement in Shelby County, but you see actually very similar stories across the United States, like almost identical stories about solitary confinement being banned or limited in states for youth, and then reports of solitary confinement happening at juvenile facilities around the United States. And also you see on the legislative level a lot of backsliding in terms of reforms to juvenile justice. So in the 2010s, many states, as Joann said, decided that they wouldn't be trying as many youth as adults. And now many states are trying to pass laws that would try more youth as adults.
Yeah.
A lot of this is due, I mean, it's really due to federal guidelines that come down to the state guidelines. So the states run the DCYS, like the Department of Youth Services, which basically runs the detention facilities for youth who've been committed, in the parlance of the juvenile system. It's different than the adult criminal legal system. You don't say convicted, you say committed, right? And but when when there's like the detention center that's here on the Shelby County level, this is kind of what we would consider jail, right? For adults. It's pre-trial, it's pre-conviction, right? And so you're literally holding young people in the Shelby County Youth Detention Center, and I know it has a different name, but it is a detention center for young people who have not been they've just been accused of a crime. Okay. Right. They haven't been committed. They haven't, of course, in the juvenile system, you don't have a jury of your peers. You just have a judge. Right. So there are a lot of different things where youth don't have as many rights. And so when you have, different types of federal and state policies, and you have this kind of fear mongering that's kind of brought up this specter of, oh no, people are criminals, young people are criminals, which has been happening since, there was a brief little moment in 2020 because of COVID where they were trying to get people out of the detention centers because they were breeding grounds for COVID and they didn't want to be liable for that, quite frankly. But then you see this uptick and you see this blame, all of this blame that's shifting, and it's part of these narratives that have been happening in the political sphere. And they're just stories. They're all just stories. The reality is that none of these young people has actually none of their crimes have been confirmed by the courts. They're just sitting in detention.
Yes.
Okay. And when you even when you take out the solitary housing units, the solitary confinement, which, by the way, the Human Rights Commission, like the Global Human Rights Commission, said this was torture 20 years ago. Okay. And our U.S. Supreme Court they considered it cruel and unusual punishment for children because their brains are still developing. It is one thing to put a 35-year-old man in a solitary housing unit who has a fully developed frontal lobe, it's still torture. They're still being held in solitary. But it's even worse to do it to someone whose brain's still developing because of the way the neural pathways are forming. It becomes a permanent impact, a permanent trauma to that young person's brain, so much that it sets them back so much more in terms of being able to get over their traumas that pre-existed them even being in the detention center to begin with. And then you put them in there and you treat them like this and you dehumanize them. And you know how young people are. You tell them they're bad and they're wrong. And they're either super defiant or they're super shameful, but they're like, oh God, maybe I'm bad, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And so there's this thing that follows people, young people and families who, once they get out of the detention center, it has caused so much more trauma on top of the trauma. And then their behaviors, and you live in a place like Memphis, Tennessee, where, more than 50% of the African-American population under the age of 18 in Memphis lives in poverty. That means if they have access to healthcare, it's Medicaid. And do you know what is available for young people who are on TN care in terms of mental health and behavioral health services that are not re-traumatizing? It is not enough. and I mean, I know this from experience. I have children who are in TN care, and we've had to go through and try and access these types of therapies and support systems, and for people who don't have the access, it's like you're just kind of trying to do this on your own, and it's very, very, very hard to break out of this cycles of trauma. But this is the way it's set up, is not giving people pathways out, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just the juvenile system. It's the way the schools are set up as punitive, with this kind of punitive approaches to young people's behavior. All of these behaviors that are getting criminalized are typical adolescent behaviors. And guess what? All the white kids are having these behaviors too, but they're not the ones ending up in the juvenile detention center.
Definitely true. Yeah.
And they have this thing in the youth system called status offenses, which aren't actually crimes for adults, but they are for children. So out after curfew, or skipping school. And so these are things that they're set up to control this young youth population, and to not, what did they call it? Rehabilitate. It's not, there's no even lip service to the young people that are in here need our help, and how can we help them? Mm-hmm. It's completely the opposite. Mm-hmm. And so my thing that kind of blows my mind is like, how can people think that this is good for our community and good for our society and good and for the greater good of the people who live in Memphis and Shelby County, to set people aside over here, treat them, unconstitutionally, and harm them and cause trauma and crisis, and then put them back out and give them back to their homes and to their families, and think that that's going to help with our quote unquote crime issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? It's just going to make things worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's like something else I want to add to that too. I mean, you brought up a ton of really, really amazing points. I want to emphasize what you said about how almost none of the youth in the juvenile detention center have formally been found guilty of any offense. That was something that I knew when I started looking into the juvenile detention center. I think I didn't really internalize what that meant. I think I assumed that, like, well, if you're being picked up by the cops, if a magistrate decides that before your adjudication, which is the child equivalent of a trial, that you have to be detained, it must mean that, like, a kid did something wrong at least. That's actually not true. Many of the youth sources who I talked to basically say that they never did anything wrong in the first place, and they were picked up because they knew someone who may have committed an offense, or they were related to someone who may have committed an offense, or they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of my sources who was held in solitary confinement was really just released at some point, and he was never found guilty of anything. So he went through this entire ordeal, and a magistrate decided that there was no proof that he had actually committed a crime. And it is both traumatizing, as Joann said, and I think it also really makes you lose faith in the legal system in general, which I think we should really all think about when we talk about crime. Like, if you are concerned about crime, you really should want people to have enough faith in the legal system to appeal to that legal system to resolve their disputes. They should be able to have an expectation that when something happens to them, that their concerns will be responded to. And they also should have an expectation that they will be treated fairly, because if they do not have that expectation, they will not rely on the legal system. And that actually contributes to crime. So, I would talk to these youth about how it felt to have these things happen to them when they hadn't necessarily done anything wrong. And something that really struck me was that none of them were surprised by the way that they were treated. All of them basically said in some form or another, and I think one of my sources said this very directly to me, that he didn't expect to be treated any different because he was a young Black kid in the juvenile justice system, and this is just what happens. And again, I think that we should all be very concerned that that is like a prevalent perception, which is very much rooted in reality, that because of who you are, you will not be treated fairly within this system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that means that they're not going to take, they won't call the cops if something bad happens. That means they don't take their civic responsibilities seriously because they don't feel like they've been included, responsibility without benefit, kind of, and does not bode well for the future. Generally, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on this morning. Joann, thank you so much for coming on this morning. Everybody, read Rebecca's story that's on the cover of the flyer. We're in 300 boxes all around the city. It's also on MLK 50, which is our one of our proud sister organizations. We're very happy that we're able to partner with y'all so much. And everybody, go to Bridges 6:30
Saturday night.
6:30 Saturday night for Juvenile 5 Stories. It will change your view of these issues. This has been the Memphis Flyer Podcast. Thank you so much. We will see you next week.